was compilation of a family tree. Good afternoon, dear friends. My name is Ildar Shafikov. We will talk about genealogy today, the science about discovering relationships. State Archive of the World Federation is doing genealogical studies for many years. They will present you how to organize this genealogy study by yourself. Genealogy study consists mainly of four main stages. First stage is systematization and working with your home archive. Second stage is surveying your relatives. Third stage is work with archive documents. And the fourth one is the presentation of the survey results. When we are talking about the first stage, we should remember that the work of any family, any human, is impossible without archiving documents or documents overall. What kind of documents? There might be copies of passports, certificates, applications, everything that our predecessors, our relatives have left after themselves in the, let's call it, official format. When we are studying and systematizing family archive, we should remember that any hint, even the insignificant one, might lead us to unexpected results. For example, when we are working with the family archive, we should first set a clear task. Systematization of archive is getting access to specific data. Data for continuing genealogy study are usually the endpoints. They are very simple. First of all, we would be curious to know birth dates, names, the degree of relationship between respective people. Often death dates are getting lost, residence place, as well as various documents of ownership. Maybe some land ownership passports, various more modern types of similar category documents. Once we have systematized this home archive, the documental part, we would end up having a number of folders which have the data for the people who are either members of your living members of your family or deceased ones. Here we should pay attention to the following. What's important for us is not only the documentary elements of understanding of the family, but also facts. We need to understand the emotion. When you start doing genealogy study, you have to understand that for various reasons, some brothers, sisters, cousins, etc., did not keep equal level balanced relationships to avoid some negative issues at the next stage. When you'll be talking with other relatives, I would first invite you to start working with documents that were closest to you. Once you have created certain register of relatives, and you of course understand in your mind who is who, what is the relationship, where they have lived, when they were born, when they died, we can move to the next stage. But there is a fine thing there. A large, widespread corpus of documents we don't pay attention to are photos. Photos are old and new, sometimes pre-revolutionary. This is a very interesting source, and quite often it is very informative, especially the older photos, because older photos have inscriptions at the back, and these inscriptions, not only the dates when they were taken, but also some wishes. The older the photo is, the more informative it is. The older photos were often written on the back as sometimes wishes, etc., as open letters. In that sense, we are getting not only the open data, but also emotional component thereof. When you move to the next stage of work with sources, which is the survey of your relatives, questioning, asking them, that's very important, because this emotional background, the way people were interacting with one another, quite often it is having certain tint of your next steps. Every time when you're getting new photo, new card with some very warm best wishes to your close relatives, it's always a plus into your contribution. It's always good memories. It's always smiles. It's always good mood. Just like us nowadays when we are getting bad letters with negative connotation. The same thing would be there and the reaction of your relatives, etc. So on top of the documents, having studied the pictures, we are getting new data and systematizing them similarly. In that sense, we start having registers. We might end up having various folders where we have various information on the separate representatives of our family. Next stage is surveying our relatives. Talking with relatives, we should remember two things. First, you can't guarantee that what you have discovered when studying the family archive would be matching what they remember. Because of human memory specifics, we try to remember only the good things. And going back to that conversation about the emotional background, it would make sure to keep this interaction with the relative, because if that person will close in himself, etc., it will be difficult to open that person up again. You should organize this conversation in a positive mood. And there are some things that that person doesn't want to remember from. You better not touch that first. Any family, there might be positive aspects, there might be challenging issues in life. Thus, it's always better to approach this conversation from the edge which recalls positive memories. In this sense, you should be developing this conversation as directing your interviewee and not questioning him. In that sense, you should be showing the picture, asking them about specific person, etc. Older people very well respond to your questions about their childhood, even if it was challenging. They usually remember it much better than their middle ages. You should remember this, because 30-year-olds, grandmas and grandpas, are those who were born either pre-war or during war. Thus, that period of life is very important for them. It's also important for the memory of our country, because that's the period that we haven't lived and we would never live again. They went through that, and everything they went through would be an important lesson of value message for each one of us. In this sense, look, it's a scientific study, but at the same time, it's emotions. Emotions we might be lacking now. That's a big hint of mine. When you are working with your relatives, please keep records, maybe even video records. It's much easier to store those. When we are talking with our relatives, we are directing them to a number of thoughts that will help us later. If our grandmas and grandpas were born in 30s and 40s, it's important for us to remember, to discover when their parents were born, because the memories about their parents and their childhood would be very important here. Next important moment would be to understand where they were born, where did they grow up. If those are two different places, you should collect maximum of information about both of respective points, both settlements, let's call it that way. Third element, material well-being of the family. Information about this is very important, because when we move to the materials on the previous era, pre-revolutionary eras, quite often they would be even definitive ones for the collection of additional information. If your grandmas and grandpas remember that grandmas and grandpas went through the collectivization process, their belongings taken away would be a hint. State archives of the Russian Federation do store materials on those who are in respective categories. That will give you a chance to file an application to get information about your grandpa, if they were repressed politically or if their ownership was collectivized, for what rights were taken away, whether they were sent to some internment camps. Usually respective documents have information about what they were declared responsible of, respective witness material, etc. If their ownership was collectivized, respective description of the material also is there. Oftentimes what we hear is our relatives are saying that we were relatively rich before revolution, and what they were rich of is enumerated in respective documents, what they think is as riches that were back then is not necessarily what we value today, which is itself an interesting element. Next step. When we are talking with our grandmas and grandpas, that might lead to the fact that information that you have about some of your predecessors might end up to be very different from what your grandmas and grandpas remember. You don't have to insist how it was that I have found such and such a document, that certificate, etc. That wouldn't be a correct approach, because grandmas and grandpas have remembered their parents the way they remember them. And in that sense, we won't be able to change their worldview. But we should be ready for this. We should understand that factual study of documents might lead to very different outcomes than what you expect, or would be very different from what you get from serving your relatives. Why does that happen? Because 1920s and 30s were very challenging for our country. And quite often people are artificially and consciously were changing information about themselves, not to get into the risky category of those to be repressed or other reasons. There are some cases when information that exists today and is shared with you by people is not documentary. It's just an invention of the people about themselves. You should be ready to this. How this happens? When you go to State Archive, the information you got from your relatives would not be confirmed by the records in the State Archives. And when you go through the gross description that your settlements were stating, you will see that very different people are falling under the general criteria. And it turns out that indeed, for some reasons, they have changed their names and surnames. And what we have is two personas. One is in the document, and the other one, the other persona, is that everybody else knew. Even though that was was a different person, was the same person who was forced to continue existing this only possible way for survival. So going this, the laws of genealogy state that in every generation we start having the doubling of predecessors. On the first and second stage, you should remember about certain, say, limits of your study. Because keeping in mind that with every generation you will have the double of predecessors, you can easily calculate. You have you and mom and dad. Both of your moms and dads have their moms and dads, grandpas, and every generation, the number of those would be growing. You should be identifying specific lines of your genealogy that you would like to concentrate on. Our society is built on patrilineal society. We are getting our patronymic and surname from fathers, and usually this patrilineal history is valued. All the side branches and matrilineal branches have secondary character. Even when we are building a genealogy of our moms, we are building it by the line of the father or mother. In that sense, the genealogy is challenging to be built through the maternal line. That's the fact, because the accounting documents of the Russian Federation as well as the Russian Empire at the times were built on the patrilineal branch, and that would be difficult to trace the history of only ladies of our family. That would be something that we would have to remember to begin with. Now, let us move to the State Archive of the Republic of Tatarstan. We have the data from our home archive, from what our relatives have shared with us. What do we do next? To move to the work of the State Archive of the Republic of Tatarstan, you need to have a minimal set of data per person at the place of birth. The year of birth should be until 1918 or 1920. Why so? Because within that period, the accounting system is changing, and after that the data is stored in a civil registry system. If you don't have enough information, that's okay. You should file an application to a respective civil registry department, and you will get a certificate from them about the data that you request that would have the names, the dates, which you can use to go to the State Archive of the Republic of Tatarstan. The State Archive of the Republic of Tatarstan stores the data in the following manner in the large register lists, which are called metric books.
For all who were born on the Republic of Tatarstan, and as you understand, before revolution, we didn't have Republic of Tatarstan. It didn't exist. We had several regions from which later on Tatarstan was organized in 1920. So Kazanskaya gubernia is it was part origin of some other parts of Russian Empire. Administrative divisions of Russian Empire was completely different from the Soviet Union. And when we talk about Russian Empire, the main category was Uyezd. And Uyezd, it's quite a big territory, much bigger than the modern areas. And as for Uyezd in Republic of Tatarstan, we have 11 of them. And when you talk and research genealogy before revolution, you have to understand that the names of the settlements, names of these administrative territorial units, in which we had certain citizen towns, they were changed, and you have to synchronize it. Well, internet helps, where you can see how before revolution certain places were called names of certain settlements before revolution. When we synchronize these databases, we start working with state archives according to the annual registers, and every metric book has information about every person who was born, who died in a specific year, and we search specific settlement for specific years, for specific year, because we know when certain person was born whom we're looking for. As one more thing, for our region, we have Christians and Muslims, and their genealogies are a little different. Let me briefly explain them to you how they're different. They're different in their marriage documents. Why? Because before revolution, Russian Empire, we had Shariat, and Shariat was treated differently in Muslim families. Well, we had polygamy, and one man could have several wives. So each wife could have several children. Second, the marriages were registered in bride's family, whereas in Christians, in bridegroom's family. Well, in Christians, it's not difficult to find dates of marriages. You can find the date of birth of the grandpa, then you follow up in the timeline, and then you find the time of marriage. Well, when it comes to Muslims, this method doesn't work because bride and groom, they move to wife, and if you don't know where the grandma was born, so you couldn't find a lot, because brides sometimes were imported, let me put it this, from many kilometers. And so we have these metric books. Let's begin with the Muslim metric book. It looks like that. For us, it's important to understand that the metric Muslim book is different from Christians. In Christian metric books, they didn't have divorce information, whereas in Muslim books they did have. And Christians didn't have separate book for divorces. 4 parts of the metric book. First about newborn, second about marriages, third about divorce, and fourth about deaths. What information we have here? In metric book, about newborn, were recorded by imams in mosques, and imam filled, according to chronological order, every newborn baby. The first was about boys and girls. And then the next one was the name, and then data. And the fourth is the biggest one and the most informative one, with information about parents. They separately write about father and about mother. Usually information about father is given up to the third generation back. And the third column, last column, is the place of birth. Usually it's a settlement in which the metric book is recorded. Next one, marriages. Well, marriages section is different. Why? Because there you have a age of bride and groom, their social status, the place of birth of bride and bridegroom, then the chaperones, and the ones who conduct the marriage ceremony. Also the best man and the best girl names, then the assets and property given to the bride and groom in monetary value and in things. So why it is so interesting? This chapter shows the material position and the well-off of both husband and wife, and then gives information about the closest generation, relatives or the parents or chaperones and or trustees, if they're alive or dead. And we also can find tamga. Tamga is this is a special science used instead of signature. It's very important thing when we don't have the direct proof about the relatives of certain people. You can always be helped by Tanga, because Tanga changes and evolves very slowly. Every generation adds it, but the basic shape of it you can understand. So that is why people with the same Tanga can be maybe not close, but still relatives. Next, divorces. Divorces is, as you see, well, divorces chapter, usually the reason for divorce, date of divorce, and conditions of divorce. I can't say that there are a lot of them. Sometimes, some years, nothing, just one or two divorces. The last one is deaths, where you see the name of deceased person, names of parents, date of death, and diagnosis. It's very interesting, especially for the beginning of the 20th century, when progress in medicine became much better and much more diagnosis, because people and doctors were trained in diagnosing this much better. Sometimes maybe touch of devil, there was such diagnosis, or sometimes just very curious cases. And sometimes we had a case when somebody died at the age of 80, and in this section of death was just climbed on the mill and fell from it. So the 80 years old guy climbed on the mill and fell and died. Well, quite a case. So we are now working with a real document. So we open metric book Muslim 1909, Pachinarse village. According to our information, some Kudus was born there, and we'll try to restore his genealogy. Kudus has number 16, 1920. Gabdel Kudus is his full name. He was born on 23rd of November. His father, Samsudin Shazalidin, and mom, Arasa, daughter of Ilya. So we have information about his father, Samsudin Shazalidin, and his mom, Asharach Nisa, daughter of Ilya. So choosing every year, going down to 1908, 1907, you can get to all his relatives, brothers and sisters, his siblings, who were older than he was. If we go down to 1910, 1911, so you can find his brothers and sisters. Up to what time? We usually go and search until the death of one of the parents. Why? Because usually at that time the age of death was life expectancy was about 40, 50. You see, we go to the next chapter. We'll try to find the marriage of the parents of Kudus, Shamsuddin Zalidinovich and Ashraf Nisa Ilyasovna. So in 1890, they married. 9th of November. There is interesting detail. Let me remind you that marriages, Muslims, are registered in the bride girl's side. So the girl married in the village of exception, in the village of her husband. There is one explanation of this exception. And here it is. Maybe the girl was stolen, was abducted. So abduction of brides, it's a quite ancient custom in different nations. Well, the abduction which was agreed and abduction when it wasn't agreed between relatives. In this particular case, when we studied these documents, we can say that abduction was mutually agreed. The girl probably really wanted to marry these guys. She agreed and she went to her village. Then parents were informed de facto that the girl was abducted and married. And after that, this official marriage was confirmed. And when we move on to the content of this document, well, let me just say that the amount of money, of ransom amount, or kalim sometimes, this ransom is called, and this ransom is 90 rubles. And the father of groom promises to pay full lump sum during majlis, during the wedding ceremony. And in this case, we, speaking of modern traditions, we're talking about a registration which we have in modern registration offices. And this paragraph about marriage is called vakat, and it's called a marriage contract. In marriage contract, they register the conditions, terms and conditions on which the girl from father's house moves to her husband's house. And the amount of maham just stipulates the status of the family in certain settlement. So what information we can get from there? The main information we can get here is, so the next generation, if we know that a father of our Gabdel Kutus, of our example guy, it's important for us to understand who was father and grandfather of Shamsuddin. So the father, Shamsuddin's father was Zalaluddin, and his father was Zalaluddin Gabdin, and so we get information up to the 4th generation back. Now we move on to the next category, so they are revistki сказки. So these are the big taxation registers where we can find information about families, not according to the date of birth. Each family had its number, and they followed every changes in the status of family. Why it was done? Because of the fiscal policy in the Russian Empire. As a rule, the land taxes and the land distribution was according to the males in the families. So male was the main actor in this kind of documents, and the main taxpayer. And number 5. In the Revizhskaya kasta, we see Bikulova, Zabdel Gabdin. This is the great-grandfather, and he was born in 1801. And you go to 1850, 1854, we get information about the previous generation. According to our documents, we can go down to the Yekaterin the first up to the 1780s. We can do exactly the same in Orthodox genealogy, and the first information which we can get, and we look for marriage documents of some guy. His name is Pavel Filipov, Pavel Filipovich Galtsov, speaking in modern Russian. He married in 1896, 21st of January. An Orthodox metric book is almost the same as a Muslim with some different chapters included, but it doesn't have the main thing, or it's the basic difference is that it doesn't have divorce chapter. If we open the marriage chapter, and we see that it is organized in exactly the same way as a Muslim register book: date of marriage, the age of husband and wife, social status, names of parents, and instead of best boy and best girl, we have the guarantors. The people who in Christians don't have the mahar thing, and this material side, financial side, it is not reflected in the records. What we see there is that some Pavel Philip of Goltsov, Orthodox Christian, has first marriage 21st January of 1890 at the age of 20. And he originates from Sarali village, and his wife from Krychovka village, daughter of Gavrila Pavlov, Tatiana, Orthodox, 23 years old. Which is interesting because usually we think that grooms are older, but in this particular case, the bride was older than groom, and from this date, from 1896 minus 20, Paul's age, and we find his birth date. So he was born on the 12th of January. He was baptized on the 13th of January. His father, I just read exactly what it is, the peasant, Philip Mikhailov Goltsov, and his wife, legal wife, Aksiniya Prokhorova, Orthodox. And we have names of the Christian parents, or godparents, and the name of the priest who conducted the baptizing, sacred baptizing. So you have to pay attention. There are always two dates, the date of birth and the baptizing date. Between them, usually there is quite a significant period of time. Why? Because as opposed to Muslims, the Orthodox churches were built, were just one for several villages. There was a church and several villages around, and as soon as the priest gets to the specific certain village and baptize children, so that it happens. Or maybe parents go to the priest, go to the church. That is why in winter, during the blizzards, the difference can be a week or even 10 days between date of birth and baptizing. You have to keep it in mind when you work with this kind of sources. Knowing all of it, we go back to Levitskim сказкам, and here we have Anton Safronov, in whose family Philip was born. Philip was grandchild of him, grandson, and as you see his grandfather, we can say that his father, Safron, was born in the 18th century, because Anton was born in 1798. So this is the end of our master class, and let me just say again that because of modern technologies, the National Archive of Republic of Tatarstan allows us to work remotely, and you don't have to work with the dusty documents. So I wish you good luck and good luck in your search and in your life.